There's nothing to play, man. There's no good horror games out at the moment. Whoa, who are you? There isn't. Like, you really think there's some good horror games out there? Name one. I said name one good horror game, not just any horror game. Can you even count that as horror, by the way? Okay, no, I'm not even gonna bother listening to you. I cannot stand that game. No, you're no use. Like, who recommends Bam Bam as a horror game? I'm sorry. No.
Stupid brown hair having ass.
Like, I don't know what to play, man. It's so dumb. What? The neighborhood? What? What the hell's the neighborhood? My friendly neighborhood. What's that? Wait, what? Some crazy voices going on or something, man.
Hey, my friendly
Jesus,
neighborhood.
okay. My friendly neighborhood. I got it. I'll try it. Okay, I'll try it. Jeez. So a lot of Mascot horror games nowadays are safe to say
Help me!
interesting, to say the least. So when the demo of My Friendly Neighborhood dropped a few months ago, I was pretty skeptical of what I was actually getting into with this game. But until I saw the trailer, I was actually quite excited, as it literally just looked like Resident Evil mixed with Sesame Street. I mean, like, what's not to love? You're just shooting a load of puppets. So as soon as the game actually fully released, I played the entire game over on Twitch and on YouTube, and you can see my full playthrough in my previous video. But with this game, I was so impressed with this game. It blew my expectations completely out of the water, and in my opinion, it is the best Mascot horror game since the original FNAF. So let me explain. My Friendly Neighborhood is a game where we play as Gordon, an electrician who has been called to turn off the antenna at the top of the My Friendly Neighborhood Studios tower, as the show has been shut down, but for some reason has begun airing again, as the antenna has started working on its own and it's now being shown over the public news. So our whole task in this entire game is to turn off the antenna at the very top of this roof. Unfortunately, when we get into the actual area of the My Friendly Neighborhood Studios, we actually cannot just go straight up to the antenna, as the game would be a little bit too easy if that was the case, as the elevator that brings us right up to the top of the roof is glued together with some sort of solvent. Our whole task in this entire game is to go in each area of the studio, solve puzzles, find little clues here and there, and then eventually work out how to fix the elevator and then actually make our way to the roof. So the game starts with a cutscene basically showing the neighborhood being shown over the public news, as we do get a few other TV shows along with there, as we enter the My Friendly Neighborhood Studios in our van. We then get a slight look of the whole main area of the studio. We have the likes of the My Friendly Neighborhood Studio Tower, the aviary, the public park, and that's just a few to name. As we enter the My Friendly Neighborhood Studio Tower, that's the roof we're meant to get to, we realize that the elevator does not work, until we go to the desk of the lobby in this area and ring the bell, as we get introduced to our very first neighbor.
Raise the curtain. Bring up the lights. The neighborhood is coming to town.
This sock puppet goes by the name of Ricky. He's one of the only puppets in the game who's actually friendly, to say the least, and actually helps us on our mission and is one of the key characters in this entire game. As most of the time when we enter a new area like the aviary or higher up in the studio tower, Ricky normally pops out of somewhere to give us some information, some story, and also a few jokes here and there. And sometimes, instead of a joke, he drops a stage card.
And I'll get you some. Oh, that wasn't pleasant. I'm gonna take a sec.
For whatever reason, but to help us along the way. Once we finish talking to Ricky at this lobby station, he does cough up a key card to stage 4, which indicates that's the next section we have to go to. Now when we enter stage 4, we do get a glimpse of Norman, who is shown on the cover art of this entire game. We fight the first couple of puppets until stumbling across a circular door that we need to find a key for. Now this is where I get a really big Resident Evil vibe from this game, as a lot of this game has you covering the entire map in order to find puzzle pieces and essential items that will help you drive towards the end of the story. Now before we end up entering the circular room, we end up in a green room where we find the main pistol of this game called the Rolodexer. Now the fun thing about this game is every weapon, it doesn't just seem like the game just gives you a shotgun or pistol out of nowhere. The game actually plays into the hands of its entire theme, as all the bullets and all the guns are somewhat cartoony. As in the Rolodexer, the mag and ammo isn't actually just normal bullets, we're actually shooting paper letters at the puppets, which I think completely suits the theme of this game, and it doesn't seem out of place whatsoever. As when you put it into perspective, we are shooting Sesame Street type puppets with a gun. You know, when you put it in that kind of perspective, it sounds really out of place, but when you actually see it in action, it seems fine. Now, as we pick up the gun, we enter the circular stage room, as we come across the actual neighborhood film set. And this is where we are introduced to the main boss of this certain area. The cool thing about each area of this game is that there is always one specific puppet that will harm you more than just the normal puppets. For example, in the neighborhood, we have Pearl, a massive bird-like character who is actually blind unless you give her glasses, which then she becomes actually friendly to you. But before you end up giving her the glasses, she is blind, so she might just end up running into you and trampling you, which could obviously take a lot of health off you. Now, there's one thing I absolutely love about this game, and that's the level design. Every level and area of this game looks amazing, especially in this stage 4 section, as we explore the actual film set of the neighborhood, as it genuinely feels like we're just exploring a Sesame Street film set. As someone who grew up watching Sesame Street, it felt really surreal as you look at certain doors and certain areas of this film set, and it nearly looks identical to how the Sesame Street film set actually looked in real life. As someone who again grew up on Sesame Street, I loved every second of this segment. We collect letter blocks and place them in order to say neighbor, which ends up giving us a letter to post in this letterbox, which we then open and gives us a crank that we can use at a different part of the map. This is where it really does become Resident Evil type, as I said earlier in the video, as we do get certain items that we might not use straight away. We might have to store them in the storage lockers that is available to us to use later on in the game. However, this crank is used pretty, straight away. You don't get much of a hint on where to use this crank in this sort of neighborhood area. I ran around the neighborhood looking for a place to place the crank, and I couldn't find an area for around 15 minutes. Until I ended up leaving the film set alone and going back out to the main lobby. This is where I actually realized the game has changed atmosphere, as when we came in it was morning time or evening, and now it's completely dark, as now we then get a load of LEDs of arrows pointing us where to go. Well, you have to keep your eyes peeled to see them, but they're pretty obvious. This is where it actually leads us to place the crank in this sort of letterbox. It looks similar to a letterbox, but it's quite obvious where a crank would go. Gordon then spins this crank to where we actually stand on a sort of sewage pipe by accident, and by turning the crank we accidentally open the sewage crank and slide down into the basement. And yet again, when we enter this area, we are introduced none other by Ricky again, explaining to us how we're in the basement and we're a long way away from the roof. Now down here we solve puzzles like simple math, so we'll need 10, we'll need plus 6 plus 6. That'd be 12. No. 10? Plus 2. No. It has to be plus 6, so. Circle. I'm reaching my so I get to 10. 4, 6. Plus 2. I'm stupid. Well, simple for some. And also we get introduced to the new weapon, the Novelist. This is the shotgun of this game, and let me tell you, I had so much fun with this weapon. Now, the only thing with this weapon is the shotgun shells are pretty rare to come by, and in the harder difficulties of this game, they're even rarer. So you have to make sure you use each shotgun shell perfectly and effectively, which is another thing I love about games, is task and resource management. I think it's really effective, and it makes you think that every bullet has to count. Now our mission this time is to find bolt cutters, as we find a door that leads to an elevator is chained shut. We solve an electrical puzzle as we need to open up fuse boxes, which gives us a code that will lead us to actually put some chess pieces in an electrical box, which will then open up a vault. This vault contains a load of statues of each neighbor from the series, and contains a statue of Norman holding bolt cutters, which can then be used to open up this chained up door. Now as we unlock this door, we end up beginning to step towards the elevator, which leads us into one of my personal favorite levels of the entire game, and that's the MFN Studios lobby. In this level, we explore the MFN offices as we find a cinema which holds our next available weapon, a grenade called the Punctuation. As we explore this area, we've again solved little puzzles and play Monopoly against Norman, and you know, Norman's favorite game, a game of slaps. Well,
Hey, you can't do that!
what? This actually caught me so off guard when Norman slapped my head around, I can't lie. But this Monopoly game is heavily RNG based, like really heavily, because you can get really bad luck with the cards you can draw, as it genuinely took me, I think, 3 to 4 attempts to actually beat Norman at this game. We also get our first boss fight of this level, where a massive curtain spawns just as we enter the last stages of the puzzles in this level. We end up having to fight a massive curtain that shoots Norman's dead puppets and also the little hand puppets. Let me explain to you, these little hand puppets are the most annoying people in this entire game. Ignore any other sort of puppets. These hand puppets are the most annoying thing in the entire game, I can assure you. Like, they're one hit when obviously they're supposed to be used by hitting with the wrench, as you know, you want to save ammunition. However, these things just jump on you. And to me, sometimes when I swung with the wrench, I could have a really long range of swing. But sometimes when I swung, it just didn't register it, and I just got absolutely mauled by hand puppets. Wasn't my finest hour, I will admit. But after this, we can then leave the MFN Studios and return to the main entrance that we started at. However, another thing in this game is we find many keys. They're all in sort of shapes. For example, when we first entered the room with the My Friendly Neighborhood film set, we used a circular key. Our whole mission of the MFN Studios office was to find a diamond key, which would end up helping us to power the playground area, which would lead us to end up solving, you know, the solvent to go and fix the elevator. However, this game has a really cool aspect of it, because when you go into certain areas, you might see, like, let's say you have a diamond key. You might have a door that is only usable with the diamond key, but across the hallway you might have, for example, a triangular key, which you have to wait a long time to actually get in that area. Now, once we finish the boss fight, we leave the MFN Studios office and enter the main area that we originally arrived in. This is where we end up powering the playground area with our diamond key and entering our next area. Now, this area caused me the most trouble by an absolute mile, as our new boss puppets of this area are puppet dogs. And the worst thing about these dogs, they're unkillable. You can't tape them down, you can't do nothing. You have to just knock them and stun them and then run away. And also, you must solve a hefty amount of puzzles in this area. Now, for me, these puzzles were very difficult in my opinion, as this level's mission is to make a liquid in order to melt that purple goo we saw on the elevator at the beginning of the game. But also, this area by far has the most fetch quests, as we must use 2 medallions to open the aviary, which gives us the triangular key, which helps us solve and find the ingredients needed in order to make this liquid to unstick the elevator door in the MFN Studios. Once we end up finding all the equipment needed for this jam solvent, we must return to the MFN Studios. We then melt the purple goo from the elevator shaft and then enter the elevator. Now, a lot of people would think, especially myself when I played this game, okay, this is going to be the ending. This is where we actually finally get to the antenna and, you know, finish the game. However, the game is not as easy as that. When you get to the top of this elevator, you enter a new area. And in my opinion, my personal favorite area. This area is absolutely amazing, and that is the Paperland area. This area is by far the best looking in the game, as the level design is absolutely memorizing, as every floor, wall, and item are all drawn from paper. This is very similar to the show Elmo's World that used to air after Sesame Street when I was a kid. But our main mission is to find puzzle pieces as usual in order to find the lever to the lift. that ends up helping us to get to the actual roof area. Now, our new puppet that we get introduced in this area is called Arnold. All Arnold does is honestly just play the piano pretty badly as we go around the area. He's not much of a threat whatsoever. Now, the puzzles in this area are very confusing and very, weird to describe, as we do have to solve a cooking recipe by putting pictures in a specific order and also, as usual, killing more hand puppets. Now, once we end up fixing the lever and playing piano with Arnold, we then pull the lever, which then lifts Gordon and Arnold up to the rooftop. We then say goodbye to Arnold as we enter the rooftop area. We then enter the rooftop area as it's a very stormy night and then begin to climb towards the antenna. As we begin unscrewing it, none other than Ricky appears once again in a very sentimental scene, as he pleads Gordon not to disconnect the antenna, as for example he thinks the world didn't want the show to air in the first place because of how mean the actual real world is compared to the show on the neighborhood. Unfortunately, it doesn't matter as Gordon doesn't comply to Ricky's asks and he does disconnect the antenna. However, when we do disconnect the antenna, our screen flashes white as Gordon gets hit by lightning and falls from the MFN Studios building. However, Gordon gets very lucky as he falls down a hole, down a trash chute. This is where we enter my favorite area of the entire game, which is the unfriendly neighborhood. Now, this was hinted at in other pieces of dialogue in the earlier stages of the game, as when the studio was shut down, as the puppets could do whatever they liked. They run the studio now. They could watch TV as much as they wanted, and and some of them were exposed to very violent natures. This area really amplifies the horror of this game, as we explore an abandoned film set, until all of a sudden when we step towards this film set, a wall breaks down and a swarm of nightmare puppets begins chasing us until we stumble across the best boss fight of the entire game. Now, after we escape the haunted puppets, we enter a much darker film set, similar to the neighborhood in stage 4, as when we enter this area we look up, use our flashlight as we get a jump scare of a massive amalgamation of puppets begins to hunt us down. As the escape door that we need to use slowly rises, we realize that we have to fight this amalgamation monster alone. Now, this fight is absolutely amazing, as we have to fight for our lives against a monster that wants nothing more than to kill us and remove us from the neighborhood. This is by far my favorite part of the entire game, as we really get to use the weaponry provided to their full extent. Like, we can throw grenades, we can just hammer this monster down with every bit of ammo we have, because beforehand we get stocked up on ammo. I had 7 grenades to throw at this monster, so I had an absolute blast in this boss fight. Once killing the monster, we then enter the elevator that brings us back up to the MFN Studios as we leave, and then we leave the main entrance of the building and get our final cutscene. As we leave the building, we enter a cutscene as Ricky pops up one last time. Gordon is on his way to leave until Ricky asks us one last question.
Our ability to care for. And on the personal side, I think it's obvious that we need a bit of a guiding hand.
Are you kidding?
Gordon, do I look like a sock that would kid?
Ricky, I'm just a maintenance man. I don't know how to run a studio.
Oh, I think you can handle it. It can't be that hard.
What if you end up like them?
I don't think we're the ones you should be worried about, Gordon. Come on. Won't you be our neighbor?
We get a choice ending as Ricky asks us to run the studio and get it back up and running. Or we can choose not to be their neighbor and let the studio shut down and be let to rot. If you choose yes, we get a happy ending as the show returns to TV and becomes a big hit with all fans and ends up getting a massive studio deal. However, if you choose no, you get a sad final interaction with Ricky as you get promoted for your job, as you then realize that Gordon is nothing more than just a sad old man and he has nothing to really live for. As a cutscene plays over Gordon's apartment, however, the guilt begins to bring Gordon back down to earth as the game ends. Now, this game to me is such an amazing addition to Mascot horror. Like this, we've had so many entrances in this genre that are just massive corporation has a massive tragedy, workers for whatever reason die, or customers die and inhabit the sort of mascots that were the main establishments. For example, FNAF was the first to ever do it. For example, the missing kids possessing the robots. Then we have Poppy's Playtime, which almost looks like experiments have been done on either kids or workers that end up turning them into the monsters. For example, Ban Ban, I don't even know how to explain Ban Ban, but to me, this is such a fresh addition to the genre. The only thing that really lacks in this game is story. That's the only thing. The story of this game is very, very, subtle, and you don't get much explanation of, or are these puppets haunted? And I don't think that's the case. I think these puppets just work on their own. I think we're in a universe where puppets are just real people, like how Sesame Street and Muppets did seem to kids back then. Like when I was young and I was watching Sesame Street, Ernie and Bert, Elmo, they seemed like real characters to me and real creatures. They didn't seem like a puppet. Obviously, looking back on it now, it was pretty obvious that they're puppets, but to me, as a child, in a child's brain, they seemed like real creatures and people with personalities. And also, the best thing about this game, it doesn't feel like a cash grab. Bart and Ban Ban. Oh, sorry, I'm feeling a bit sick today, sorry. What were you saying about? But it feels like genuine love and passion was put into this project, and it blew my expectations completely out of the water. It really had me immersed for all 5 to 6 hours of gameplay, however it definitely lacked in story elements. But in my opinion, this is the most fun I've ever had playing a Mascot horror game since the original FNAF. Obviously Poppy's Playtime I'm a huge fan of, but for me I had much more fun playing My Friendly Neighborhood than anything since the original FNAF games. And honestly, for €20 on Steam, this is an absolute blast. And if you haven't played the game, I would highly recommend playing it. If you sat through this entire video and game analysis, I really do appreciate it, and I hope you have enjoyed this video. If you've played My Friendly Neighborhood, please let me know what you thought of it down in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, and I hope you all have an amazing day. If you do enjoy horror content, I'd really appreciate if you dropped a subscribe on my channel. I'm sure you'll like my content if you enjoy anything to do with horror. Thank you all so much for watching. Have an amazing day as usual, guys. Stay safe, and peace. First shot of this episode. Tammy picks this house.
Oh, what about that one?
Now, if you ask me, that is the, worst house you can pick. It has wallpaper on the outside.